everybody! How you doing? Welcome back to the channel. I am in the shop here. I'm going to turn the heat up a little bit. It's chilly. I'm in the shop today and doing a bunch of videos and working on a couple of knives. And I wanted to touch into the series that we're doing here on Knife Making 101 and giving you guys a little bit of some ideas. I think the lighting's better. Part of knife making is not just shaping the knives and doing everything, or like I touched in before, and the series is kind of going backwards in a way, so please forgive me. We did gluing up the scales, we did shaping the scales, we did the Kydex sheath. I'm working on a Montana now, and this has already been heat treated. I'm working on a Montana, and now I want to show you guys a little bit about what I do about hand sanding a knife, a little bit about what I'm using, why I'm using it, and it's pretty inexpensive. So let's touch in on this a little bit. Okay, the first thing I want to show you guys is bench vise. This is my bench vise right here. Nothing fancy. This is probably the most expensive part of the entire thing I'm going to show you here, this process. You got to have one of these. Every shop has to have one, at least if not two. They're so universal. You could do so many things with it. I can't even go on. You'll see I use this all the time for doing things with my knives. In previous videos you've seen that I'm hand sanding knives and stuff like that, and I wanted to touch base now exactly on what it is I'm using and why I'm using it. They do make very expensive like a jig, you know, it clamps to the bench and it's round and you can put your knife in it, or it articulates all these different angles, and it's like, oh, it can go all different sizes. No, and they're really, yeah, they're nice, but it's really not necessary. I mean, I started in my shop, and one of my first couple of videos, I actually took a knife and I had it mounted to the plywood worktop, and I had a piece of plywood going over it, and I had the plywood screwed down, and it was holding it like this. Now, it held it just great, but the problem is it did give it flex. And prior to heat treat, when you're hand sanding your knife before you do the heat treating, if you applied enough pressure, you'd bend your knife, and then you got to straighten it all back out again. I also learned on a jig that it was a round tube that my knife mentor had made, and it had an acrylic in the center of it, and you'd stick the knife inside it and you'd clamp it down. It was really neat, and you could rotate it a little bit, but the problem is when you hand sand it, you would actually, you could bend the blade before heat treat. So what I ended up coming up with years ago is I got this, just a piece of angle iron. This is nothing but a piece of, I think it's 1.5 inch by 1.5 inch. Let's see, 2 inch. So just, like 1 7/8, but basically 2 inch angle iron. I cut it off at what I thought was the best length for most of the knives I do. And this one is, I cut this off at 12 inches. And then what I ended up doing is, at first I just curved this edge. I cut it, and then I took it to the grinder and I curved it, because when I wanted to put my knives on there, it would follow that curve of certain blades. And as I hand sand a knife, sometimes this gets pretty close to being an edge, and I've cut myself in the past. And so this curve was to allow me to keep the blade as close as possible to the edge, yet still be able to hand sand and not hit the metal as I was trying to go back and forth. Hopefully that makes sense. So I just made this. I mean, it's literally, you could find scrap maybe at a local scrapyard, but I bought this at Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that and cut it down. Then I took myself a piece of leather, because I do leather sheaths every now and then. I cut myself a piece of leather. It's like an 8-ounce leather, and that was it. Now, because I do taper tangs, I took a shim, and the shim helps keep the knife from wiggling. Let me see if I can get you guys to see what I'm talking about here. When you have a taper tang and the knife goes in, you'll see that it's got this wiggle, right? Because this is the center point of the knife. And there's this wiggle right here. So if I'm hand sanding down on this, this is sticking up. But if I want to keep pressure on this to keep it from moving, this clamps down and this blade sticks up, and then it goes like this. Now this is a heat treated knife, so it's not going to bend as I hand sand it, but it will have this wiggle. And the one thing I've learned is you want a stable knife. You don't want wiggling in your knife as you're hand sanding it, because the pressure that you're applying it's like the shock absorber. If you're going to dig in on this knife and you really have some bad marks or something from a grind that you were doing, you really want a stable knife. So this way, when you're applying pressure in there, all that pressure is translated right into your steel. So by pushing down in a knife like this, you take your shim, and your shim comes in here, and it takes over the wiggle. See? So now you don't have a wiggle because the shim is making up that difference of how that taper tang goes. Hopefully that makes sense. The next thing I end up doing is I just got myself a clamp, a nice little 3-inch C-clamp right here. This one's actually made in the USA. It's a, it says 3 malleable, whatever that is. But and I just clamp my knives down just like this. I'll just come in here, and because this is the tang, it doesn't matter if I scratch it or anything. But that's in there. So now if I hand sand, there is absolutely no flex in this blade. So everything I do, all my energies are going right into it. It's all going right down into the blade. So again, the bench vise is probably the most expensive part of this whole process. And I think that brand new at Lowe's was maybe 65 bucks or something, maybe 85 bucks. But that's the most expensive part. When you're at Lowe's, you literally can buy your shims, your clamp, and your steel, and cut it by hand, and and grind it or something. And honestly, guys, you don't really need to have it rounded. I just find it's a little bit easier for me to do that, again, as you've seen with the blade. But a lot of times when I flop the blade over, if I take this blade and I take this off, and I'm going to take this, I take this off and I take the blade and I flip it over. If the knife is like a Montana, like this, I don't bother changing the metal. The other side's curved too. You see this side's curved, but I don't flip it over because that works just fine. I don't have an issue. So to say that you have to curve that, I don't think it's necessary. You can play with it and see. You can curve one side and leave the other one straight and kind of go with it. But this works for me. It's already curved. I curved it. I just leave it like that. I've got the straight edge here, but I don't worry about it. I just keep it that way. So that is the jig aspect of things. Now the second thing I want to do is show you to save money, because you're going to be at Lowe's buying your stuff and you're going to be in the mild steel section. Grab a couple of these. I went ahead and I got myself some mild steel, and this was about 1/4 inch by 2, and it's just mild steel. And what I ended up doing is I ended up cutting it in length. I rounded the edges off, softened all the sides. Then I went and put 2 different types of bevels. This is perfectly squared off here, and this was perfectly squared off here. Although I think after the last few years it's got a slight angle to it, but it still works great. I beveled this slightly, and then I put an extreme bevel on this, just leaving a little bit of a flat lip on there. And what I do with these is it's used to wrap your sandpaper. And I'm pretty stingy. There's guys out there that have big fancy sanding blocks or other things that they use. But when you use those big sanding blocks, you're only using a certain part of the sandpaper. So you're wrapping this up over, and you get this much of the sandpaper. Well, the problem is now I've got this piece and this piece that I can't use for anything because it won't fit in that jig. So you have to get one of these, and you have to wrap that on there. I think these just work fine. Both of these are from the same piece of steel. I just cut it down and shape it. This is the same thing. I made this a little fancier. This is about 1/2 inch wide. Let me see. Right, 5/8 of an inch wide, and it is 8 inches long. So this is 5/8 by 8 inches, and it's 1/4 inch thick, mild steel. Ground everything down, rounded off. I actually dimpled the mild steel with holes, and then I took some old micarta that I had, and I actually epoxied it to this, and then I ground everything down, hand sanded it smooth. And I gave myself something like this. So as I'm grinding or hand sanding, I take the sandpaper, I wrap it around just like this, and then I can just get in here and I can just hand sand. And my hands are kind of protected by this rounded curve. It's a little bit more comfortable. Now this one I didn't do it to because the pads were wider. So it gave me enough to put my hands down like this, and then I can apply pressure. So the pads of my hands are laying on these, and I can apply pressure evenly, and it's nice and flat. The reason why these angles are different is because this is meant to get into really tight spots. I can get right in here with my sandpaper and the choil right at that edge, and I can clean that little corner up right in there. I can clean that grind line up, and then I can draw it back just like that. And then on some knives, again, this isn't even, but it doesn't have to be because the sandpaper's wrapping over, and it's just meant to be able to get in here tight to go in, because sometimes you might not have the ability to hit something flat, or maybe the sandpaper might cause an issue where it rounds off the edge too much right here. So that's what you use these for. I primarily use it like this, and I hand sand like that, and that's what I'll use it for. And I cut my sandpaper wide enough to fit in this. Okay, now one of the other things I wanted to touch on too was sandpaper. Now I'm using a wet-dry sandpaper. I get it from, they're called Rhino sheets. Let me adjust you there a little bit. They're called Rhino sheets. I think they're made in Portugal. I'm trying to think, it's not Combat Abrasives I get this from, it's somebody else. I'll put it down below. I'm trying to think of the name offhand of the company I got this from. But they're Rhino wet sheets. Matter of fact, here's all my sheets right here. I get them all here. Here's 120, 120, 220, 400, and 600. Oh, here we go. Super Grit. There's their information right there. Super Grit Abrasives, Red Hill Corporation, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. All this will be down below in the description box. So I use wet-dry sandpaper. I'll do 120, 220, 320, 400, and every now and then I do 600, but not that often. And the jig here and stuff, I can't give you a good price range of what this is, but I bet you, depending on how much sandpaper you bought and stuff like that, but you can get going and sanding knives easily for $100. That wouldn't be an issue there. And something that's going to last you a while. Once you spent the $100 making these things or doing this, it's going to last you quite a while. So it's not something that's disposable like sandpaper is. Lastly, the liquid that I use to hand sand my knives. This was a huge thing, and I was talking to my old knife mentor, my buddy Jeff, and I was telling him this is how I learned. He had me using WD-40. And then when I went to his shop a little over a year and a half ago, he was using water. I says, what's up with that? He says, well, water's cheap. He says he learned that he used water a lot, but when he was teaching people, or when they came out to their shop to work on their knives, they were using water. They weren't cleaning and drying their knives off, and they'd hang their knife up and it would get surface rust on it. So he switched everybody to WD-40. Now I learned on WD-40, so I never even thought about using anything different at the time. Then as I started getting into knife making, I saw guys using Simple Green, water, Windex, WD-40, and I got to thinking, I'm like, well, what would be the best media to use, the liquid to use for hand sanding? So I tried all of them. I got my Windex, I got my WD-40, I got my Simple Green. As a matter of fact, I still have the bottles down below here because I use the Simple Green and the Windex for my acid stonewash knives. And so I started going through it all, but ultimately I went back to WD-40. And the reason why is WD-40 is not as watery. Its viscosity is thicker, being an oil, versus Windex, water, and Simple Green. All of them are more water-based. So that was the one big thing. Now, water's free. But the problem is like Jeff was saying, if you're not diligent in taking care of your materials, now you're adding water to everything and it's rusting. And that's not just a knife. That includes everything else you're using. Your mild steel flats, your angle iron, your clamp, anything around you, you're adding water to it. So water was a big negative for me in that aspect. Simple Green and Windex, you had a little sprayer and he sprayed it, it was good. But again, Simple Green was a water-based product. It smells good. And Windex, it was fine. Even if you bought the cheapest stuff, it's still real watery. Water, Windex, and Simple Green had one thing in common that it didn't have with WD-40. And that was, when I use WD-40, the WD-40 sticks to the steel. Even after you, and it don't take a lot, I just dab a little bit on my blades and a handstand. And I dab oil on my sheets. I'll dip my fingers into WD-40 and I'll rub the oil on the sheets. A little bit on the blade. The WD-40 sticks to the water, to the sandpaper, and to the blade that you're hand sanding much better than water, Windex, and Simple Green. When you spray those or you apply it, it runs off. So your surface, the blade, doesn't stay as lubricated as it would with WD-40. Yes, you have to buy WD-40 and water's free, but you also have to buy the other two, which is Simple Green and Windex. And I just got to thinking, you know, after doing it all and really doing some trial and error, WD-40 was the way to go. So I buy the big 1 gallon can, and I fill up this little can right here. I shake it up a little bit. You want to stir it because WD-40's got some solids in it. You got to stir it all up. But I do this. I just open the can up, I set it to the side, and I keep filling that up with the can that's back over here. I got the WD-40 can right there. I just fill this up, I top it off every couple months or something, and then what I'll do is I'll just dip my fingers in this and I'll just get my sandpaper wet with the WD-40 just enough to get a coat on there, like that. So hopefully this helps some of you guys with another part of the knife making series here. Paper towel, you know, shop towel kind of stuff. It's not a big deal. I use paper towels here. I find these are really good with wiping up the blades, but they're not good for cleaning blades off with acetone because they fall apart so much. So if you get these really cheap, then use these for wiping your blade off. If not, get this. Use regular paper towel. And like, you know, I got buckets. I used to use just rags, whatever you got, cut up t-shirts, use it. Not a big deal. You're done using them, toss them in the garbage can, it's over with. But hopefully everything here is laid out enough. I'll have little pieces of scrap leather that once I hand sand, the first thing I do is I hand sand, this is heat treated, I hand sand a tang, and I put this on there and I use my C-clamp. I use a C-clamp here, I clamp this on, which is nice about the angle iron, you can clamp that. And then I hand sand everything and it doesn't scratch the blade. And then when I'm done doing both tangs, I'll flip it like this and then I'll just take that and clamp it right to the steel because I don't care if I scratch that because it's being covered by scales. But it's just one of those things that you want to try to use as much as you can with a little bit of cost. You know, you see how I store everything, you know, these little Rubbermaid containers like this, little cheapo things, you get like a 3-pack or something. Oh yeah, my sandpaper. I cut the sandpaper, they're 11 by 9 sheets. Each one of these is cut so where I get 3 this way and I get 2 this way. So if that makes sense. See, that's a full sheet right there. So if I was to lay these out, this would be a full sheet wide, 3, 6, 9, and it's 11 inches. Each one of these is 5.5 inches. So again, utilizing everything that I can and be as efficient as possible. So hopefully this was helpful. You guys, I do appreciate all the comments. Like, share, subscribe, all that good stuff down below. Check out, if you're new to the channel, check out over here on the left-hand side, or your right-hand side, different types of topics that might be under CK Knife and Tool, or just click that CK Knife and Tool down below, and check out what else I got. Until the next one, guys, you have a good one. Take it easy. We'll see you in the next video. It's funny how the good ones go. Too soon, but the good Lord knows the reasons why, I guess.
Sometimes a greater plan is kind of hard to understand.